My name's Jay Costa. Thank you guys so much for watching. Welcome back to the Jay Costa USA channel, where we look for people who are looking to fight for, protect, and defend our Second Amendment rights here in the great state of New Jersey, as well as other blue states like it. And speaking of people who are looking to fight for, protect, and defend, this guy isn't only just looking to fight for, protect, and defend, but he's actually out there doing it every single day. His name's Joe Loporto from New Jersey Firearm Owners Syndicate. How you doing today, Joe?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Yeah. So, we've been working with each other a while, or a little while anyway, during this election season, sitting at the gun for hire tables for early vote action. So I've gotten to know you a little bit. But I wanted to, and I'm sure many people that are watching right now already know you, but just a little bit of an introduction. Joseph Loporto is a passionate grassroots activist. I can attest to that. Freelance writer and speaker. Loporto serves as a director of government affairs of the Civil Liberties Policy Research Center of New Jersey, a state-level think tank. He's also the director of legal operations of the New Jersey Firearm Owners Syndicate, a 501c4 Second Amendment organization that funds impact legislation. Loporto is a life member of the Second Amendment Foundation and a member of the Federalist Society. So, Joe, you're going to today help me mostly because I have so many people reaching out to me that are asking me to give them updates on a bunch of different Second Amendment legislation, whether it's on the federal level as well as the state level, whether it's for or against anti-2A or for our Second Amendment, protecting our Second Amendment rights. And frankly, I feel ill-qualified to give them a legitimate answer. I try to help as best as I can, or at least point them in the right direction. I usually point them to you guys. So I figured it was a great time to get started with you, have you on for a little bit, and kind of talk about some of the biggest either pro 2A or anti 2A legislation that we have going on right now, both on the federal and the state level. We'll start with the federal level. Just recently with the reconciliation bill in Congress, which is a budgeting bill, let's just call it. People are talking because in that bill there is something that would allow us in across the country, but specifically in New Jersey, where we're not really allowed to do 80% of what most of the rest of the country does Second Amendment wise. It would allow us to save our hearing for once and actually maybe have suppressors. So give us an update on that. What's in the reconciliation bill that would change the NFA, and how would it affect us in New Jersey?
Sure. So, some important sort of backstory on that one too. Obviously, with the election of Donald Trump, there was a very, very broad based agenda with respect to the Second Amendment, and President Trump has put his vocal support behind a number of legislative issues. So there's lots of things happening on Capitol Hill right now across a whole array of different topics, both in terms of legislation and in terms of legal developments with regards to the DOJ and their stance on certain Second Amendment cases that are percolating through the courts right now. But as far as federal legislation is concerned, it's a challenging environment in Washington, D.C., and has been for probably the better part of 50 years, right? With very, very thin margins and this sort of constant oscillation and flip-flopping with every single election cycle. The Democrats take a slight majority for a period of time, and then it swings back the other direction, and we have these very, very, very tight margins on Capitol Hill. What that means is, the majority party at any one point in time may be able to pass bills in the House, but the filibuster rules create some fairly significant hurdles to passing legislation. So if we were to just pass the Hearing Protection Act or pass the Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act in the House, there may be enough Senate votes to pass that on a majority basis. But in order to what's known as invoke cloture, which is to close debate on the Senate floor, you need 60 Senate votes.
Right.
Which is extremely difficult. There is, however, one big exception to all of that, and that is the House and Senate reconciliation bill. So if it's something that can be tied to the budget process, then that cloture issue in the Senate does not exist. It becomes a majoritarian process in the Senate. So a simple majority in the Senate can pass a budget bill,
Right.
and the Hearing Protection Act, because it's specifically the nuance to all of this is that the NFA is tied to the Treasury Department in the sense that it's essentially a tax provision. It's not an outright ban on suppressors. It's not
You just have to pay.
on short barrel rifles. It's a tax bill, and so by virtue of that, the Hearing Protection Act could be included in the reconciliation process as a tax and spend measure, and that is exactly what has occurred. I will say, we played a small role in that because uh, that the budget bill passed this morning by a measure by a vote of 215 to 214 votes. So it passed the House by one vote, and every single vote in the House mattered on this bill. Um, it took a nationwide effort to make this happen, and this was a massive effort that was undertaken with a ton of cooperation across the whole litany of Second Amendment advocacy groups, nationwide. I mean, I think it's a huge testament to the fact that when we cooperate and we work together, we can achieve amazing things. So through that sort of massive effort, um, the critical parts of the Hearing Protection Act were in fact amended into the House reconciliation bill. That cleared both the committees that are necessary to get that included into the reconciliation process. And this morning, the full House voted 215 to 214, and now that bill is headed to the Senate.
And then now it's only looking for a majority, a 50 plus vice president would be all it would take.
That's correct. Yeah, with the way that the voting procedures work with regards to the budget reconciliation process, we get a simple majority in the Senate, and that bill goes to the president's desk.
So how would this affect? Because I know a little bit about the reconciliation process, just budgeting wise. It's a bit of a, it seems like in layman's terms, it's a bit of a loophole, let's call it, that both parties have used as we've gotten more, harder to get bipartisan support on things. And let me just backtrack a little bit because I thought what you said was very interesting. I just wanted to add something to it. As the margins have gotten tighter in the House and the Senate and Congress, you also see in my opinion, I feel like we've seen Congress give more of its cede more of its power to the executive branch as well. So, Congress can go back and forth. Republicans control it, Democrats control it, but it's really more so about who's in the White House and what they could do by executive order. And this is just generally not even just Second Amendment stuff we're talking about now, but you see that's why you see large swaths of executive order from Trump. And then if the next person comes in who's a Democrat, they're just going to wipe everything away. And it's really very difficult to get something actually codified into law, which is exactly, what we're trying to do here, because what difference does it make to us if we can, get the get the Hearing Protection Act in, if it's just going to be, reversed in 4 years or whatever. So I find that very interesting. But what does it mean to us in New Jersey if this is passed as part of the reconciliation process? Does that mean that in New Jersey we'd be allowed to go, buy suppressors, or is there still state law that we would have to battle with next?
Yeah, well, there's maybe two parts to that. One, again, we have to see how this plays out in the Senate, right? Because now the reconciliation bill is out of the House and moving to the Senate. There is going to be an opportunity for the Senate to weigh in on it, and they can make amendments to things and change things. So we have to see exactly what pans out as it relates to the Senate.
What stays in there, basically.
Exactly. If it stays in exactly as it's currently written, there are some specific provisions in there that relate to what states may or may not do after its enactment. So there are some provisions in this that would make it clear that states can't essentially replicate the NFA, right? They enforce a specific tax on suppressors. They can't create their own registration requirements. Those provisions are in the federal bill right now. If it passes as is, that gives us a little bit more protection as it relates to, the sort of out of control blue behind enemy line states and how they'll retaliate with regards to this particular element of the federal bill. Now, in New Jersey, we are still subject to a state statutory ban on the ownership of suppressors.
Okay.
So that doesn't go away by virtue of this. And without saying too much, I mean, there is a lot in the hopper right now with regards to litigation. And a lot of this too, again, if I was to make a single point on this, I would say that the moral of the story here is that elections have consequences. In 2024, and this is a statistic that the NRA has been sharing widely, and they deserve credit for it. Right, in 2024, roughly 99% of NRA members voted in that election. Right, that played a critical role in delivering Donald Trump to the White House for a second term. Now, why is that important? Obviously, the alternative was going to be far worse from a Second Amendment perspective. But the fact of the matter is that when gun owners participate as vigorously in the political process as they have, then we get the recognition and support from that administration, right? We show up and deliver, and then, democracy kind of works in that sense. And the Trump administration is prioritizing, reversing out a lot of the gun control measures that have been implemented over the last 20 years through a string of, let's say, Democrat-controlled periods in both the White House and the House and the legislature. So we're getting the results. There's been big changes with regards to the way the DOJ is doing business vis-a-vis the Second Amendment. And so that is a huge tailwind with regards to future litigation on a variety of different topics, right? And so it's been a busy sort of era as it relates to Second Amendment litigation in the sort of post-Bruin world. There's a lot in the hopper, both in New Jersey and around the whole country.
Right.
And I think it's fair to say that gun owners can expect more of that in the future, both here and elsewhere, that is going to touch on these topics. We are fighting for our rights here in New Jersey, but we are but one of many, many organizations, and it's a busy, busy world. And we have a much more favorable climate to do that right now. This bill helps with that too, right? So New Jersey gun owners our membership put a lot of effort into contacting our reps, making our voices heard. And I'm happy to report that the entire New Jersey GOP delegation voted for Trump's budget bill. So they played an important critical role in getting that passed. As I said, was a one vote, majority that passed that bill. So every single one of those counted. And even though we're a smaller state, we've only got 3 delegates on the GOP side in Washington, D.C. Those 3 votes played an important role. New Jersey is a blue state. And so it's a little surprised that there's, I don't want to say a reluctance, but let's say, an imperfect track record amongst New Jersey Republicans in the Congress as it relates to topics touching on the Second Amendment. And so getting unity on this issue was a big victory, and everyone played a part in that.
Great. So based on what you're telling me, if they only got it by 1 in the House, that means they lost some Republican support, right?
It's funny. I didn't go through the entire roll. I think there was a handful of abstentions on the vote.
Gotcha.
So, but there's only 220 Republicans in the House right now.
Okay.
From a legislative point of view, if everyone's voting, it's 218 votes to pass a bill. So we were only 3 shy of a full House majority. Or what's necessary to normally pass legislation. Special rules apply because of the budget and the reconciliation process. But Yeah, tight margins, not a lot of room for defections on this. My sense is that the folks that didn't vote on the bill had more to do with sort of deficit spending and other issues. It wasn't on the Second Amendment.
Right. It wasn't this because this is as we mentioned earlier, the reconciliation process. This is basically part of an entire budget, right? So
Correct.
just because you voted against this doesn't mean you voted against the Second Amendment, right? Per
That's
se.
exactly right. Yeah, that's
Right.
exactly right. This is all good.
There could also be money going to Ukraine that someone doesn't want to, and they vote no because of that. For
That's
instance,
right.
I've made that up, but
Yeah, this is all forms together in what's affectionately known as the omnibus bill at the end. So it's this sort of one big giant tax and spend bill that contains all sorts of things. Everything that the federal government is going to do in this budget cycle is contained in this one bill.
well,
So
it's great to know that that you mentioned that the New Jersey GOP has shown some support for it. I think you're totally correct. Obviously, that we have and this is one of the more bigger reasons why I even started this YouTube channel in the first place, is because people like us have a larger say, have a bigger voice in our state than we think we do. We just have to actually use it for something other than complaining, right? So you do see, I'm sure you see as well, just as much as I do, kind of like a groundswell of people that are similar to us in our values and in our views, specifically on the Second Amendment, among other things. And they're kind of tired of it. They're tired of complaining, and they're actually out there doing stuff in order to enact the change that we're looking for,
yeah,
specifically on the Second Amendment. So that's great to hear. Now, so basically, if let's just say this passes, back to the New Jersey aspect of it, there is still a ban on owning suppressors. So that would have to go through a a litigation process in order to be challenged, correct? Similar
well,
to like the carry killer bill that is being challenged?
correct. Yeah, I mean, in theory, the New Jersey legislature could get the message from Washington D.C. and take legislative action on the ban. I doubt that they will.
No.
So I think it's unlikely. I mean, we were extremely successful in the 2024 election from a federal point of view, but the state election this year is critical to our rights. For the moment, the Democrats are 2 votes away from a supermajority in the assembly. And so we've got to claw back a lot of ground before we can have any sort of discussion about legislative initiatives in the state.
And they did actually, sorry to interrupt, they did actually, if I remember, have a supermajority before 2021, right? And the Republicans gained some seats there.
We were probably in the same overall sort of margin picture in the lead up to the 2021 election. I don't think they were to have a true supermajority, right? They'd have to have enough votes that with just Democrat votes, they could override a governor's veto.
Right.
And they were close in 2021. And in fact, during the sort of waning years of Christie's administration, there were a couple of bills that got
through. They got over, even though he vetoed them, right?
Yep, got through on an override, but that required some defections from the GOP side, and that did happen in those instances. They've been close. Again, they have a controlling majority, and so it's critical this year that we flip some of those assembly seats, because regardless of what happens in the state election for the governor's race, without some swing in the assembly, it really won't matter who the governor is, right? We're
Right.
2 votes away on an override. I'll say right now, there's a handful of GOP delegates in the Trenton that do historically tend to vote with Democrats on gun control issues. So in principle, they already have the 2 votes to override pretty much anything that a future governor, whether whoever wins this primary and then ultimately the general in November. The Democrats could still pass gun control without some significant movement in the assembly. But you're right. In 2021, we did see a pretty big improvement in those numbers. I think that was a year with both assembly and Senate seats up for election. And I think in 2021, even in a loss, we were able to flip 8 seats across the legislature that year. So that did give us a little bit of breathing room. But unfortunately, in the midterms, they kind of clawed that back. So
Okay, I
we have
gotcha.
some work to do. But again, gun owners played a big role in the election results in 2024. Our mission is to make sure that gun owners come out and do the same exact thing in 2025. It's critical, and we can make our voices heard in the ballot box, and that is infinitely less expensive than years of litigation.
Yeah,
So
because that, to be honest with, and I've been following it obviously from much more of a distance than you, the litigation aspect of, specifically the carry killer bill, because that's really what is affecting us here in New Jersey more than anything right now. Because obviously after Bruin, we were able to get the permits, but then they tried to, they said, okay, if we're going to be forced to give out carry permits, finally, we're just going to restrict every single place that you could possibly think of going to. And, I hear from a lot of the subscribers here on the channel, like they keep asking for updates. Like, what the hell's going on? Why is it taking so long? Now, I know what's the saying? The whatever, the law takes a long time, right? Lawsuits take a long
yeah,
time. Legal aspects and court cases take a long, long time to go through the process. Explain to us where the carry killer bill is specifically in regards to the appeals process and all that sort of thing, and if and when we could be looking for any sort of update from the courts at all.
yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag on that, right? I mean, there was definitely um, there's some justification for the speed at which the Third Circuit is sort of processing this. Um, the sort of current stance of things with regards to the Coons and Siegel cases, which are the two challenges that were introduced to the Bruin response bill when that was signed into law in December of 2022. That is up on appeal on a preliminary injunction before the Third Circuit. It was argued before the Third Circuit almost 600 days ago, and we're
Wow.
counting every day that passes, with regards to this. I think um, waiting 2 years for a panel of judges to make a decision on something certainly feels unreasonable to a lot of people, and everyone is frustrated with the amount of time that is being taken here. I will say that there were a flurry of cases that erupted after Bruin in 2022, and that has led to sort of the percolation of a lot of different themes and topics working their way through a variety of districts and circuits around the country that is now
Right.
making its way to the Supreme Court. Uh,
I'm sure a lot of them are repetitive and redundant as well, and covering a lot of the same aspects. So that probably takes some time as well.
yeah,
But yeah,
there were some key timing issues, right? So our case went up on appeal prior to the Supreme Court issuing its decision in U.S. v. Rahimi, which is a pretty critical case. Um, so, given the pendency of the Supreme Court weighing in on a topic that's somewhat adjacent to what we were litigating about in that case, it's actually favorable to us at the time that the Third Circuit sort of paused to wait to see what the Supreme Court was going to say in Rahimi, right? Because that was their first big sort of Second Amendment case post Bruin, where we were going to get some indicators as to how the Bruin decision was going to evolve in future jurisprudence before the Supreme Court. So, Third Circuit would naturally wait for the Supreme Court to weigh in Rahimi, given the timing of our appeal. And then there were some really big Third Circuit cases that were sort of pending prior to Coons and Siegel that were also, imagine like a sequence of dominoes just sort of falling one by one. There was the Rahimi case, but then on the heels of that was US v. Range, which was a really important case from a Third Circuit point of view. That case dealt with the question of whether nonviolent felons were able to get their rights back under 922G. So it was a challenge to a federal law. And we were victorious in that Range case, and that went up before the entire Third Circuit. So that was a really, really critical piece of litigation that was pending in the sort of queue before the Coons Siegel panel could weigh in. And then on the back of that was another case out of Pennsylvania called Lara v. Commissioner. And that case dealt with the question of prohibitions on 18 to 20-year-olds in terms of them being able to exercise their rights and whether or not they're sort of part of the people. On the merits of that case, the Third Circuit ruled that yes, 18 to 20-year-olds are part of the people and are entitled to have the same, exercise their rights in the same way as other adults. But much more importantly, central to that case was the question of the quote unquote reference time period for analyzing things under Bruin's sort of historical process, the sort of analysis by analogy. And in the Lara case, they held, the third three-judge panel held that the only proper reference period for analyzing historical analogs under the Bruin framework is 1791. Now, we're one of few circuits that have reached that conclusion. And that is an incredibly important holding in terms of not just the main question in Lara, but really all future Second Amendment litigation that sort of moves through the Third Circuit. So between Range and Lara, there is really strong jurisprudence now that is binding on the Third Circuit and all district courts under the Third Circuit. So the environment is very good from a legal point of view in terms of what we can rely on in court going forward. The panel in Coons and Siegel was not particularly favorable to us. So folks who were pushing for a quicker sort of turnaround on the Coons-Siegel decision, if that court had ruled, let's say, in August of last year, sort of between when the Supreme Court ruled in Rahimi, but before Range and Lara were decided, given the judge who's likely authoring the opinion in Coons and Siegel, we could have gotten a very, very unfavorable outcome in that decision. Now, inside baseball, if Judge Krause had sort of wrote a pretty draconian opinion on this and ruled, in a really unfavorable way to us, it probably would have resulted in sort of an immediate take-up of the case by the entire en banc Third Circuit, right? Like if she had rushed her decision and it was particularly not good for us, then I suspect that the entire panel on the Third Circuit, the entire circuit court itself, would have taken the whole thing. She probably knows that, right? So the reality is that the panel that's writing this opinion right now is probably working very hard to make sure that it's as narrow as possible, with the understanding that there's some serious challenges to ruling against the Second Amendment in certain aspects of that case. So, the sequencing of those cases was critical to us getting to the right result in the case. And all of that only wrapped up, let's say late January. So now we're a few months in. They're probably writing that opinion right now in response to that sequence of cases that came out. And this opinion is going to be a monster of an opinion, right? My suspicion is that we're probably going to see, when this drops, we're going to see an opinion that's north of 200 pages, right? It's going to be a really, really long opinion that goes along with this, probably with a whole, string of dissenting opinions. So there could be dissents. It's going to be a fairly long, piece to begin with. There's a sort of, the Siegel case in particular is sort of a kitchen sink lawsuit. It includes everything that was sort of brought up inside the Bruin response bill. So there's a lot to that case, and there's a lot that was both addressed at the district court level and then brought up on cross appeals during the actual appellate process on the preliminary injunction. So there's a lot in there. So, how long does it take to write a novel on the Second Amendment? I think that's kind of what we're looking at right now as far as what's contributing to the delay here. I mean, having said that, we are pushing the limits of what's reasonable.
Yeah, and because if it's not reasonable, then it could be challenged in that regard as well, could it not?
Well, from a strategic point of view, it's challenging to what's our options with regards to Coons and Siegel. Um, you could file an emergency appeal with the Supreme Court and say, hey, the Third Circuit's been sitting on this for close to 2 years, and that's just really unreasonable. Like, you guys need to intervene on this and do something.
Right.
Um, we saw there was a few instances of that in some of the other states' cases with regards to Bruin response laws, and that happened with respect to Antoniuk, the New York sort of challenge to their Bruin response bill. And the Supreme Court was reluctant to involve itself, right? There's a general sort of view at the Supreme Court that they really shouldn't be getting involved in what's known as interlocutory cases, meaning that the case is not final, the case record is not fully developed, it's in some, intermediate stage, either a preliminary injunction or a TRO. Like, they want to see, the Supreme Court wants to get involved when a case is fully final on the merits, the case record's fully developed, there's nothing left to talk about, the case is done, and now we could take a look at it and decide whether or not we need to be calling balls and strikes here. So that's usually when the Supreme Court wants to intervene in these kinds of cases, and not sooner. So we could certainly, again, I think there was good reason for why some of this was sort of on delay. But as time moves on, I mean, I think everyone's patience is going to run thin, at which point maybe you have to start looking at doing something to prod this along, which could involve perhaps some emergency applications to the Supreme Court to try to at least prod things. Having said that, I think it's imminent. I think we're, a few months ago, I wrote a piece where I argued that maybe it was April, May, we're kind of in that window. Could it be another month? Possibly. Could it be a few weeks? Yeah, I think it's reasonable that we'll see that soon either way, right? Because, I'll say this, it's extremely unlikely that this drags on past August. The reason is that the real work that's going on, we know it's probably underway right now, right? The opinion's being worked on. Each one of those justices has a small army of clerks that are working behind the scenes to complete and write all of those opinions. And every year around August, most judicial clerks are there for a year, right? And they typically start in August, and then that whole collection of clerks turns over in August. So then you get a whole new batch of clerks that come in August. And on something like this, I would think they would not want to leave something like this for that transition where you got to now have a new batch of people come in and sort of step in midstream on something like that.
Assess where the last ones got to, and where, if they agree with all of it, and what they want to change and what they want to move forward with, and all those sorts of things. It's very interesting.
Usually if there's anything lingering, like, you'll see a bunch of decisions drop just prior to that sort of turnover in the clerkships. So I would say worst case scenario, we're probably looking at maybe August, but I think it really could be any day now. I think that's probably where we're at. I think if we do get closer to August, you are going to start to see some of the groups that are involved with these cases taking additional steps to try to prod this along.
And how does the now, this is all for the carry killer bill, the Bruin response bill that you called it. How does the mag limit law that we have to 10 rounds capacity limit, how does that factor into any of this? Would this be a part of this? Is this are these separate cases that are going on right now? And what's the outlook on that, if at all any different?
Yeah, that's totally separate collection of cases. Those cases were decided on the merits at the district court level a few months ago, and they did go up on appeal, and the appeals were granted. The current state of play on those is both Angier PC v. Placken and Cheeseman v. Placken were consolidated. Those are both the assault weapon ban question and the mag ban question put together.
Because that would be part of the assault weapon ban, would be with the capacity, right?
Yeah, those are scheduled for oral arguments on June 30th before the Third Circuit.
Okay, so that has a little bit more of a, at least a schedule that we can
Yeah,
follow right now. It's not just up in the air without knowing much of anything, and it could happen at any time. We know that would be on June 30th that they're having oral arguments.
that's going to be on June 30th as far as oral arguments are concerned. Having said that, there's this sort of growing collection of cases that are already up on appeal before the Supreme Court that have made applications for a writ of certiorari. So the one that the two cases that everyone has been closely watching are Ocean State Tactical and Snope. Those two um, have been conferenced almost every week since January. So normally when you make an application to the Supreme Court for a writ, they'll the sort of first hurdle to clear is an initial conference review by the court where they'll make a decision on whether or not they're going to grant cert on the case. And the Snope case was originally conferenced in December, and then it wasn't actually a relist. It was rescheduled. The initial conference was rescheduled until after the holiday. So it was conferenced the first time in January. And normally, like there's a whole lot of tea leaf reading with regards to the Supreme Court. There's, at the time, everyone was looking at it going like, oh, well, if you look at Supreme Court sort of practices in the past, you either get a denial on the first conference, or if you get 1 to 2 relists on a conference, it's usually a good indicator that the Supreme Court's going to actually grant cert. So we watched that first 2 conferences go by, and everyone was like, yeah, this is it. The Supreme Court's going to step up and take this case. And then weeks and weeks and weeks went by. No denials on cert. It's just been relisted pretty much every week and put back on the conference list every single week. Now, after 3 or 4 relists, I think there was some growing concern amongst our side of things with regards to whether or not the court was going to grant cert. But honestly, with this many relists, I would actually say it's pretty likely that the court is in fact going to grant cert. And the only thing that they were doing was basically pushing the issue into the next term. So there was like a short window in January, February where they could have granted cert and heard the case in this term. In other words, before the court's term ends in June. And it looks to me, again, it's just pure idle speculation, but given the number of relists, I think it's likely that they grant cert, but they're really just trying to schedule it for that next term, which would start in September. So how does that relate to our case? That means if our case is argued on June 30th, and between now and June, sometime before now and the end of the month, the Supreme Court grants cert on either Ocean State Tactical or Snope, or now a California case is actually up on appeal, the Bonta case. If the court grants cert on any of those between now and June, then the decision at the Third Circuit is likely going to be held for that, right? Because the question is now up before the Supreme Court. So 1 or 2 things will happen. The Third Circuit will either rule, at which point it'll get appealed and then rolled up, and then likely GVR'd with those cases that the court is agreeing to hear, or we're just going to be on hold for the Supreme Court to rule on those questions. So I would say very much is dependent on what happens. The end stage of New Jersey's challenge to our assault weapon ban is very much dependent on what happens with the Supreme Court over the next couple of weeks. So
I want everyone watching now to like keep a note or recognize something. And obviously, Joe and the New Jersey Firearm Owners Syndicate and ANJRPC and among other organizations and people are extremely very, very hard at work fighting for our Second Amendment rights against these what we deem as anti Second Amendment bills, right? Law. And as you mentioned before, this takes a ton of time, a ton of resources, a ton of money. So I want to make 2 points. A, always go support New Jersey Firearm Owners Syndicate and JRPC, all of those state organizations, among federal ones too. But, we're specifically about New Jersey here. But second, correct me if I'm wrong. There's an easier solution to this, and it would be to go vote, right? Get out and go vote. So, because any of these are laws that were passed by our own elected officials, whether we like them or not, right? It was passed in the state assembly and the state senate and signed into law, most likely by our governor. So we have a massive, massive governor's race this year in November. And I know New Jersey Firearm Owners Syndicate has came out last week and endorsed Jack Chittarelli, which I have as well. Not that I have, no one cares about my endorsement, more so yours. But whether it's Chittarelli, whether it's Spadia, they would be both monumentally better for our Second Amendment rights, in my view, than anyone on the Democrat Party. So it's extremely important to get out and go vote and support either of those guys in November, no matter who it is. That being said, let's assume that we win in November the governor's race, whoever it is. What can that Republican governor, do to help in these situations, to help in these lawsuits, to help stop the constant assault on our Second Amendment rights that we've had going on in our state? What can they do on day one, and what can they do with or without the assembly, I guess, or with the legislature, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent question. And we're as you mentioned, I mean, we did make an endorsement in the governor's race. Having said that, as you said, I mean, we're prepared to support the winner of the primary, regardless of how that shakes out. We need to win in a big way in November. But it is important to remember, like, what's up for election this year. So we have the governor's race and we have the assembly. There is one Senate vacancy that is up for election this year, and hopefully we're going to flip that district too and get that one Senate seat back. But the full Senate is not up for re-election until 2027. So in terms of what's doable from a legislative point of view, the answer is going to be very limited. There's not much that a governor can do on day one that is going to drastically or radically impact our issues, our concerns, our rights. So what can a governor do? I mean, the most important thing would be to stand in place as a veto towards any future legislation that sort of makes its way up through the assembly at this point.
Great point.
We know that there's,
they don't, and as you said, presumably they're not going to have a super majority, hopefully.
Again, we need a broad-based win in November. Right, we need to not just flip the governor's race, but we need to gain ground in the assembly.
You'd figure that if a Republican was to win the governor's race, we should be able to get a couple assembly seats as well along with it. I guess you never know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the sort of tug of war between the sort of deep blue districts, deep red districts. Could you win a race by just really radically increasing the voter turnout in the reddest parts of the state? You could, in principle. That would lead to very narrow sort of changes, or very little change in the overall composition of the assembly.
Just get more of the limited Republican voters in deep blue or even moderately blue or purple areas to come out as well. Because as you see with me, sitting at these tables and stuff, registering voters and whatever, most people, even we'll stick with the Second Amendment people, most people don't know exactly what's going on at all. If they know there's a governor's race, they barely know who's running. And to me, I mean, listen, you give other people a pass if you just meet them at a supermarket or something, but for people that are like going to a gun range or a gun store and like into your Second Amendment, I guess some people try to, in my opinion, try to make firearms and firearm ownership kind of apolitical. But to me, it's like by nature, it is political. It's literally in the U.S. Constitution when they created our country. So I don't know how you can run away from being overly political about it, especially when one party generally is always attacking our Second Amendment, and the other party, is at the very least lukewarm for the most
Yeah.
part for our Second Amendment rights. So to me, you have to be involved if you're into the Second Amendment. Uh, you have to get engaged. You have to know what's going on. You have to be outspoken. You have to know what you're talking about. Um, I don't know. I think that we're going to have a decent shot to flip the governor's race and a couple assembly seats. But I think that the biggest thing, one of the biggest things, other than the veto power that a governor would be able to have, is a new attorney general. I think that at least one or two, maybe Cheryl and Fulop, have already said that they would keep our current attorney general in as attorney general under their administration, and that as a Second Amendment supporter for the people that are watching it should scare the living daylights out of you.
Yeah, that would be absolutely catastrophic. I mean, Matt Duplakin has made clear that his goal and ambition is to further the sort of the gun control agenda. He is largely.
He has to be one of the most anti Second Amendment attorney generals in the country, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I mean, he appears every month on the Moms Demand Action conference call. He has opened the door and handed over the keys to the AG's office to sort of our opposition in every town in Brady. The deals that have been struck between the AG and those groups with regards to the AG's sort of outside counsel and the entire lineup of everyone working at the Attorney General's office. I mean, gun control has been a massive part of that agenda and a huge priority for our current Attorney General. So any change there will be a radical improvement versus what we're up against right now. If a Republican were to win the governor's race in November, obviously that opens the door for us to appoint a new attorney general. It is worth noting that the attorney general in New Jersey is subject to Senate confirmation, right? And as I mentioned, the Senate is not up for re-election until 2027. So that means
and how Democrat is that? What are the numbers in the Senate?
I believe they have a 6-vote lead in the Senate.
And we just need a majority?
We need, well,
2/3?
Yeah, they're going to need a majority. For Senate confirmation, I believe they need a simple majority.
Okay. So you're saying that even if Chitterelli, Spadia, whoever it is, they appoint this very strong pro-Second Amendment advocate attorney general, but they may, obviously there's more issues than just the Second Amendment out there, but they would have the no matter what, because there's almost no state Senate seats up for grabs this year, they would have the ability to not confirm someone that they deem so so quote unquote radical in their view.
Yeah, someone who.
So it would be more of a moderate that would be getting through.
Well, listen, I mean, there's going to have to be some negotiation with the Senate in order to make that confirmation, right?
Of
so
course.
What does that mean? That means that if you pick somebody who's staunch and extreme, or however you want to say that, on any particular issue, you're probably going to run into some challenges with regards to the Senate confirmation process. In other words, there has to be some degree of some amount of bipartisan negotiation on all those appointments.
And listen, I get that is the way it should be. I mean, we don't live in a dictatorship here. Obviously, I would love to just be able to sign my own name and change everything how we want in a second. But it doesn't work like that. There are elected officials that people did put into place. It's just our job to make sure that those elected officials don't get in there in the first place by going forward by getting out and voting. And second, if they do, make sure keep checks and balances on them and using the legal system, judicial system, in order to keep them in check to make sure that they're not overreaching.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, they're obviously we wouldn't like it very much if some of these rules weren't in place on the other side, and
Right.
the shoe will be on the other foot at some point. So we have to always kind of remember and recognize that. Uh, so yeah,
And I don't say any of this to, to of course dissuade people and just get into that apathy mode in a state where it's like, oh, it's too far gone, nothing's going to change. We won't even get the a pro Second Amendment attorney general. Then it doesn't matter, even if it was more moderate. Compare it to what we have now. Compare it to what it would be under a Democrat governor, and it's still much, 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 much better.
infinitely better, right? Like if we didn't have an attorney general that was staunchly pro gun control, that made it, every waking minute of every day is spent worrying about this issue and trying to push back as hard as possible. If we just had a reasonable attorney general, right? Well, I'm not talking about
Like if
appointing.
you or I were an attorney general, what it would be? Just someone reasonable.
Yeah, right. If we had Clarence Thomas as the attorney general, that'd be great. But we don't necessarily
Right.
need that, right? What we need is someone
Give
who,
me a Roberts or something.
yeah, literally anything. Yeah, literally a more a more rational, reasonable attorney general, uh, could have a significant impact, especially when you look at the staging and the timing of things with regards to both pending litigation and what is likely soon to follow. Right? I think we're far from done in court. There's a lot of work to be done. I know, we've got plans. All the organizations you mentioned have plans. And New Jersey is a feature state with regards to fighting gun control, partially because, again, I'll revert back to the earlier topic. I know that people are frustrated with the timing of things with this particular panel on Coons and Siegel, but by and large, the Third Circuit at this point may well be the best circuit in the entire United States of America to bring Second Amendment cases at this point. There are two vacancies that are soon to be filled by the Trump administration. When the dust settles on those, you'll have close to 7 judges on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals that were essentially appointed by Trump. So we will have a very, very strong collection of judges at the Third Circuit, and there's going to be a floodgate of litigation that's coming. Gun owners should be excited about the future as it relates to stuff like that. And so, yeah, we want to keep putting the pressure on in court in order to sort of claw back all our rights. But uh, an attorney general that could reconsider some of the positions that have been taken by the state so far, especially some of the most extreme positions. I mean, we've seen the most absurd things in some of these court cases where the attorney general is relying on, in order to support their sort of version of history and their version of their justification for modern day gun control. They're relying on black codes and absolute racism from the sort of mid to late 19th century all the way back to the founding of the country. Right? They're
Right.
taking extreme positions in these cases in order to justify their arguments. And if we just had a reasonable attorney general that could reconsider some of those prior positions that we're taking and certainly provide a more rational response to future cases, that is a massive victory for us, right? That clears the decks for us to do the work that we need to do in court, both our organization and all those organizations that you mentioned. As you said, well, I mean, we need to be out supporting everyone that's getting the work done here. So that's us, that's ANJRPC at the state level, that's a whole lot of other state organizations, that's the NRA, that's FPC, that's SAF, that's GOA, that's all the national organizations that are, I would say, cooperating more than ever before in history, right? So there is a ton of stuff underway, and we can be a part of that if we participate, especially as it relates to the election in November.
Well, I think the reason is that they see the same things that we do, right? Like there's a massive opportunity because the environment that you're operating in has changed, specifically in New Jersey, but across the country as well, right? The demographics have changed. That is big in and of itself as well. The carry the Bruin decision really changed a lot of people's views, I think, on the Second Amendment in this state and other states like it. I think because specifically minorities who were obviously usually in heavily Democrat areas, and a lot of those areas are ones that are more crime ridden than otherwise. They probably maybe felt that they had should have been able to carry a firearm legally and were never able to. And then now they're seeing that they're able to, but there's all these restrictions. And I mean, if you look at the numbers, they're actually declining minorities at higher rates than non-minority people. So I think a lot of people in the minority communities are waking up on this specific issue. There's more support for it. Now we have 2 or 3 or whatever years of Bruin being in place where they tried to scare us all, saying it was going to be the Wild West, and actually the total opposite has happened. I think a lot of the environment has changed. And I also want to say one thing as well, connected to what we were talking about before, that I was honestly acting as if the legal system, the legal aspect that you do, is totally separate from the political process of elections and going to vote. But it's really not, because even you could go vote and you can go fight in the courts. But what happens is who you vote for affects who the judges are, who's in the courts, right? I mean, so that's why it's really very important, and I'm sure you agree with me, that we don't get too snobby in our Second Amendment support here, right? That say, oh, this guy said this about the Second Amendment that wasn't as positive as I want, so I'm not going to support him. He's not an absolutist like me. We could have said the same stuff about Donald Trump, who banned the bump stocks, who has claimed that he wanted to just take the guns first and then ask questions later, go to courts later. That's obviously things that we are very much against. So what were we supposed to do? Not go out and vote for Donald Trump? Well, if you did that, and if he didn't win, we wouldn't have been able to get the court decisions, both in the U.S. Supreme Court all the way down, that we would have been able to on the federal level. And that's as you could see, you're number one. That's substantial, because that gives us back to the original point, a much better environment to be able to work in order to push our agenda forward.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, politics is, and it's true in court too. I mean, we're all the organizations that are out there fighting every day. I mean, we're doing the very best we can to eke out every single little bit of a win in every case that we're fighting. But it's never a zero-sum game, right? We win here, the other side, chalks up a small victory on some other, element of a particular case, and we're working to chip away at this whole system. And politics is no different, right? I mean, we can push as hard as we can. We can lobby as effectively as we can. We don't get everything that we want all the time, but
that's life.
That's life. Yeah, every single little victory that we gain in the ballot box, and every single little bit of victory that we gain in Trenton or in Washington, D.C., though, that's immensely valuable, because every little bit of those wins reduces the amount of money that we have to spend in court. So it's not to say that we're compromising. None of these groups are compromising. I mean, there's been a lot of criticism of the NRA over the last 5 years, and I certainly understand some of it. I will say, just to plug the NRA right now, I do think that it is an extremely exciting time for that organization. I think they've fully turned the corner. I think it's the NRA 2.0 is here, and we need a strong NRA for a whole lot of reasons. So, again, support all the national orgs, but we are cheering on the NRA and the new trajectory that they're on. I think it's a huge, hugely important in terms of both litigation and what's happening in terms of Washington, D.C.
Well, Joe, we're coming up on an hour here. I don't want to take up any more of your time. You've been tremendous. I want to first thank you for coming on. Thank you for doing what you do on a day-to-day basis, fighting for our Second Amendment rights here in the state. We need more people like you out there, and I greatly, greatly appreciate it. As you could all see, he's working tirelessly, and you have a family. You have even a grandchild. Only just one, right?
One more on the way.
One more on the way. So you're going to have 2 grandkids, and he's still out there even more than I am. sitting at tables, getting involved, spreading the message, registering voters. So I just want to thank you for that. And it's very important that you go support New Jersey Firearm Owners Syndicate. Can people do that?
www.njfos.org.
And just as important is to go vote first in the primaries, because you have to show your voice that way as well. June 10th, early voting is June 3rd to June 8th, I believe. But even more important is the elections, not just the governor as well as state assembly in November. You have to go out and vote. Please, I mean, it's so important. Do not sit on the sidelines. I heard a stat. I'm hoping we're chipping away at it. I'm sure you heard it also that 250,000 gun owners in the state weren't even registered to vote. I'm sure we're chipping away at it, but we have a long way to go because this is too important to sit out this election cycle. Just because I know a lot of people get enamored by a presidential election, specifically Trump. You know, people come out for just him. He's not on the ballot, but his agenda's on a lot of his agendas on the ballot, and a lot of our agendas on the ballot, which is most important. So it's super, super important to get out in November to vote. Anything else you want to add, Joe, before we wrap up?
No, I mean that's the key message. You know, get out and vote. If everyone that watches this video gets 5 of their friends to vote, I'll throw that challenge out there. If everyone that watches this video gets 5 friends to vote this November, we will win this election. So it's on us. We can take control of this.
I see it, and you see it every single time that we do these events and stuff. I see it in the comment section, people reaching out to me on Instagram and whatever. There's an energy and enthusiasm here that I think people in New Jersey like us are fed up with the system, are fed up with not being represented in some cases at all, in other cases not as much as we should be. We feel like we've been demonized and things of that nature with how we want to believe in governance stuff. People are very tired of it, and it's people from, like I said, all different walks of life. It's young and it's old, it's black and it's white, and it's remarkable. And like I said, I think the demographics have shifted a lot. A lot of these people in the state assembly were elected a long time ago and just ran on their incumbency. But I think a lot of their base 20 years ago is on our side now. So I think they're in for a pretty big surprise.
I couldn't agree more.
All right. Thank you, Joe. If you guys could do me a favor, hit the like button down below, subscribe button if you want to check out more of our content. And living behind enemy lines for now until we flip it in November. Take care. Thank you, Joe.
Bye, guys.